el agua es un tema muy alto en nuestras prioridades en América Latina. Hemos apoyado estados, gobiernos locales, empresas públicas en el continente para mejorar el acceso al agua y al saneamiento, a construir o reconstruir redes, por ejemplo, después de catástrofes climáticas, a definir y poner en marcha estrategias nacionales relativas al agua, por ejemplo, de depresión de cuenca, y en varios países como Brasil, Bolivia, Ecuador, Cuba, etc. Para todas estas razones, en cuanto al sector, en cuanto a la cooperación con la Academia Francesa y latinoamericana, eso motivó el apoyo que hemos brindado a la organización de esta conferencia. Nosotros entonces, yo represento el departamento geográfico de América Latina, tenemos también un departamento de investigación y los dos en asociación, entonces apoyamos a este evento. La idea es a la vez escucharles para mejor entender los desafíos del sector y también compartir, socializar los estudios, los resultados de investigaciones que hemos querido acompañar. En particular, teníamos un programa de investigación general bastante amplio sobre los bienes comunes, que hemos confiado al CREDA para hacer una investigación sobre los modelos de autogestión del agua en Bolivia. Es una comparación de las diferentes dinámicas en La Paz y Cochabamba. Y los resultados de estos estudios han sido distribuidos en dos ocasiones en Bolivia, en noviembre pasado, son bastante recién. Una vez en La Paz, con el apoyo de la Embajada de Francia allá y el Instituto de Estudios Andinos, IFEA, y en otra ocasión en el marco de un día científico en Cochabamba, que hemos denominado Territorios del Agua y Comunes, y que fue organizado por la FD, el CREDA y los socios bolivianos del programa de estudio. El Centro Agua de la Universidad San Simón y el Centro de Investigaciones en Arquitectura y Urbanismo de la Universidad Federal de Bolivia. La presente conferencia internacional también es la ocasión de presentar estos estudios. En París, ante un público más amplio, aquí en la sala y en el programa de las conferencias, investigadores que van a dar conferencias mañana jueves sobre la sesión sobre comunidades y comunes, y aprovecho la ocasión para mencionar la reciente publicación de estos estudios en nuestro sitio web, en el sitio web de la FD, se puede bajar bastante fácilmente en nuestras colecciones de publicaciones. Entonces, para esto la persona donde la señora Sara Botón, que está aquí, que estará mañana con ustedes también. Así que han entendido que hemos focalizado nuestras investigaciones hasta ahora sobre agua en Bolivia, pero también estamos preparando nuevas cooperaciones con el CREDA, en particular sobre el modelo de gobernanza sectorial del agua en México. Así que vamos a desear una conferencia y intercambios académicos fructíferos, fructuosos, y deseamos intercambios intensos y fructuosos. Gracias.
Buenas tardes a todos y a todas, chers amis, chers collègues, dear friends and colleagues. I'm going to switch to English because we decided to have this meeting in English. I'm Sébastien Bellu. I used to be the director of the CREDA. Now I'm a applied professor of geography at the Institute of Latin American Studies, and I'm very happy to welcome all of you here for this two-day conference in Water the Americas. I am especially grateful to people coming from far away great to be here for these 2 days. You are brave, you know that in Paris you could either take advantage of the winter sales and maybe buy some Chanel or some Gucci at reduced rates. Or maybe you could also meet with some urban riots on Saturday, which are maybe of two phases of what old Marxism used to call the contradiction of capitalism. So France is a good place to see all those things, and I'm especially grateful that you are here in that room and not taking advantage of the winter sale of some social observation in our country. But you can do that after the meeting. So it's a great pleasure to have you all here in this meeting that has been supported by the CREDA, by the Institute of the Americas, and by the French Agency for Development, AFD. So thank you, Madame Gazon, for being with us and for what you say about the cooperation. And thank you for all the partners. At the Institute of Latin American Studies and Institute of the Americas, we have been developing a strong cooperation with the AFD in the past years, and in 2018 we engaged in the production of a policy brief to strengthen the relationship between France and Latin America, and we wanted to point out some strategic topics with a high potential for cooperation. We shared with the AFD the idea that the French government might find it useful, and if we could give some specific hints about Latin America, which is not very well known, but our current government. And we were also convinced that the relation between France and Latin America was an important one because we share a common histories and many common values, among which democracy or human rights, just to mention a few of them. Among the topics that we detected with high potential for cooperation, I might mention health, biodiversity, food and agriculture, education, and public policies. As you can see, all those topics intersect with water issues. So this meeting is also an occasion to keep working on all this problematic, on all these problems regarding Latin America, North America and France, and the way we could get a better understanding of these problems. On the other hand, our research center has a long track of research on water issues. We are not a center dedicated only to water issues. We have been working on Latin America for 50 years maybe, or 70 years. And we started including North America about 10 years ago. And Graciela Schneier, who is part of the committee, played a very important role in setting up the topic of water in our research unit, and also to open contacts with North America. If I remember well, and we were talking about that, Graciela, before we started, it was about 20 years ago when you started to put on the table the water as a research object, especially in the urban context. And then you had the crazy idea to set up a research unit in North America, in the US, in Tucson, Arizona, with the University of Arizona, the International Research Unit GLOBS, which is still working, and Franck Coupeau, who has also participated in the organization of this meeting, has been there for a few years. He was the head of the UMI after Graciela. And now we have another colleague, François-Michel Le Tourneau, who is in Tucson. So we managed to build a strong relationship starting with those crazy ideas you had 20 years ago. So I think we should recognize this. And many projects, research projects were carried on, especially the Bluegrass research project on grassroots mobilization on water issues, and some results of this project will be presented tomorrow and the day after. We also had some PhD presented here at the Institute of Latin American Studies, such as the PhD by Andrea Catenazzi, by Belinda Tobias, who is here, we're working on Argentina. So this meeting is also the occasion to open new questions, to open new cooperation on these problems of water in the Americas, to keep a strong momentum on this research and explore new dimensions. I'm not going to deliver here a full summary of all the papers that will be given in those 2 days, but I want to stress a few points, maybe to induce you to come today and the day after to listen to the full presentation and discuss with the people. We have many questions related to water and the cities, which is not something new, but what can be seen from the papers that are presented is that discussions are not limited to the governance of a centralized system of water supply. There are new questions arising from the diverse options of water supply, from local solution to water issues, to water control in a broad sense in metropolitan areas, and the relationship between water and the physical crisis of local governments that are not able to support any longer a huge centralized system for water supplies and even more centralized system for water collection. Another set of questions is related to drought, aridity, and the interesting point about what is going to be presented in those 2 days is that we look at this problem from the viewpoint of law, of society, not only the fact that sometimes we don't have enough water. Third point, the apparently unquenchable thirst of water from economic activities, particularly mines and agriculture in different regions, in different contexts, and in relation with demography. And fourth point, many important questions are being raised by local communities. Their rights, their visions, their feeling of what is water, the way it should be managed, the way it should be accessible, and the way in which we could assess these different visions in our research. Some of the problems are not given, from my viewpoint, enough attention in those 2 days, particularly the connection between water and energy, but maybe we have to organize a new conference for that. This is the challenge for the next year. And on all these topics, we will be talking about the political economy of water from and within the social science. We are convinced that this approach is indispensable to understand water challenges in the Americas because there are no technical solution outside the precise social context. And this leads to some deep theoretical issues. Many presentations claim connections with the general paradigm of political ecology. So this conference is also an occasion to discuss what we mean with political ecology and the way we can mobilize this set of ideas, of methods in our own research. To end this short presentation, I would like to remember a few practical hints about the way we are going to work. We ask the authors to send written paper in advance. So thank you guys for sending your papers in advance. So we have materials that make possible to dedicate the time for discussion, more time for discussion. So we will only have a very short presentation of the main findings of each paper, and then we will have 1 hour for discussion in each session. Discussion could be in English, could be in Spanish, could be in French. Language should not be a problem. Feel free to speak the language you are more comfortable with, and if we need some translation, we will provide some translation. Okay? So relax, language is not a problem. We want to publish the presented works, so we are going to go back to you. We already sent some messages about that to the participants. We want to edit a book with the presentation, so maybe we need some revised version of few papers that you can produce after the meeting to include some of the questions that might be raised during these 2 days. In practical terms, we will meet from tomorrow and the day after at the Institute for Latin American Studies. So in the brochure we have the address. It's a nice place to be, and the place where Latin American Studies take place in Paris. So you are very welcome at the IHEL today and the day after. I would like to give special thanks to our scientific committee. Some of the members are here today. We received a great number of proposals, so they were very helpful in the evaluation of this proposal, helping us to get what we thought was the best possible program for those 2 days. So thank you very much for your support and for being here today. And also, I would like to thank for organizing this conference the excellent and patient work of Chloe Nicolas and Carmen Bailly was somewhere in the room. And they are the 2 persons behind the general email Eau des Amériques. And they have answered, I think, every email. They have looked over every practical detail. They brought wine and cheese and some other food for not only for the mind in this room. And they were also very eager to keep with the schedule and the organization, to have a high-level meeting. So thank you very much. I would like to give them a big round of applause, and let's enjoy the conference.
interesting dimension because it's close and its mission has to deal with local communities and I think and involving practical questions. That is, for example, one of the subjects is going to be in the table that is going to be conducted by Professor Sebastian Levy. And as you can read in the biography that is in the folder you receive upon arrival, the little table there. Professor Robin has a vast experience as a researcher, teacher, as your website says, educator they use. That I prefer to use a teacher. And of course, as many of us know, as a person respected by all people involved in this transboundary, transdisciplinary fields we are dealing with. As he has gained international recognition to work developed on multiple natural and social objects, not in water. It's not discriminating. He comes into scrutiny on how human interaction with natural resources management and approach. Pay attention to this because I think this is one of the key to understand the work Professor Robbins is going to present. And he has an approach that he likes to define as, instead of talking about management, politics of rule-making and rule-breaking. So it's the approach, methodological approach, and this methodological approach has led to the path-breaking innovation and improvements we can see in his production. Robbins, in fact, explores society through natural angles, frogs, birds, grass, lawns, and ecosystem, forests, in water bodies. We can find him researching from tiny mosquitoes to huge mammals in the environment, and also pointing the scientific and social relation of human beings with the environment. And he does that from the US to India, and some of the cases he's going to develop in the presentation. And I'm going to talk about. What happens with these interdisciplinary approaches, and with this dynamic combination of natural and social fields, have gradually led to this immense innovative contribution to political ecology that we are going to share and discuss today and the coming days, as Sebastian said. Actually, Paul Robbins is a constructor of political ecology as well as deconstructor, like in architecture, construction and deconstructivism. And he calls into question assumptions, constraints, and achievement. So listen to that in his presentation. This permanent open-ended inquiry and rigorous scientific approach made him the most suitable person to kick off this conference and to participate in the debates. The conclusions he reaches on methods, on practical and scientific relation, and society responsibilities makes the perfect framework for our upcoming debate. And one of the first questions, if you have to ask me what will be the question I will ask after in the debate, I can tell it quickly right now. One of the recent papers, Robbins' recent paper, calls political ecology as a trickster's science. But trickster's science, in French I found, is trickster is a filou, in fact. This kind. I didn't find in Spanish what is a trickster yet, the real good one, no more. So I leave it to you, that I'm going to ask that question. And to conclude, I turn to Professor Robbins because this is a very good moment. I had the opportunity and privilege to meet and interact with Professor Robbins when he was director of the Geography Department at the University of Arizona, when the CNRS sent a team who came to Tucson in 2006. Professor Robbins was extremely helpful as guide and mentor to our project. He says it because he likes work on Latour, and he likes that we bring wine Latour. That was, I promise And I had to buy bottles on Blackboard. Helpful and guided mentor to our project, the Joint Center of Water and Public Policy, which has become Uniglobes, and Frank Hugo, who's behind Chloe, was the director and continue guiding this unit, and you will see that you will find presentation from people also coming from the unit. So I turn to Professor Rollins and give you the floor.
Thank you so much, Graciela. I'm going to stand for just a moment. I don't know what is appropriate. I'll probably sit when I present, but I do want to stand to begin just to thank everyone here, and especially to the organizing committee and to Graciela for bringing me all the way here. When Graciela asked me to come, my initial answer is yes. And that's because when Graciela asks you to do something, you say yes. Also because it's here with such wonderful company and such enormous academic talent, and third because, Sebastian, I love a good riot. So for all these reasons I said yes, but my second question was, why? Why? I'm most certainly not an expert on water, though many of my students have gone on to become very, very formidable scholars in the area of water. I'm passable in French, but my Spanish is terrible. I was married in Oaxaca, Mexico, so that's some credential, I suppose. But you know, I'm not a Latin American, so clearly I'm absolutely the wrong person to be here speaking to you. And this, of course, is the special genius of Graciela, to bring the wrong tool for the right job, I suppose, as my father, the engineer, would say. So I'm very pleased to be here, and this is a long way of saying I imagine I'm going to learn a great deal. Having read the abstracts, I am enormously excited to see the full papers, to see the presentations, and in the cases where they're presented in Spanish, to beg forgiveness that I'll ask you to repeat your argument later in French or English. So, merci. Thank you very much.
We are
right. All right. So I'll kick off here. And you know, when I received this invitation, my next thing after saying why is I approached two of my good colleagues, Dr. Karen Backer, whose work I recommend to you strongly on the political economy and political ecology of water, and Dr. Farhana Sultana, who is an expert on gender, water, and power throughout the world, especially in South Asia. And these two are really good scholars, and they could easily be giving this keynote far more effectively than I would. And I said, you know, what do you think about this? And they turned to me and they said, why? You know, why not invite us? And the answer here, I think, when I told them is, my job is to explain your work to everyone else. And I think that that's really what I'm doing, is that what you're going to see presented here is the work of scholars for whom I hold a profound respect, and whose work on water has taught me a great deal. And I will try to translate them through the lens of political ecology to make the case that political ecology is sometimes a useful way to approach these problems, but not always. Is that good? Okay. So, in 2016, the American Journal of Public Health released a study of lead levels in the blood of a sample of children in the city of Flint, Michigan. I'm sure we're all familiar with this case, revealing dangerously elevated levels of lead. These children were exposed to the neurotoxin known to lead to brain injury in children by the city's own public water supply. Subsequently, all the children in Flint, that's 90,000 children, 9,000 of them, were treated for exposure. This is a public health disaster predicated on water management errors of enormous magnitude, and a municipal tragedy of enduring horror for the largely poor and overwhelmingly African-American residents of the city and its inner wards that you can see here in the highest level of elevated blood is here in the inner wards of the city, that core African-American district. It's tempting, as many people did. I sat on a plane with an engineer who treated this entirely as a very interesting conversations you can have on airplanes, as a technical problem. This is a technical and perhaps a bureaucratic problem, very tempting. This is because the elevated lead levels were brought on by a decision to change the source of the city's municipal water from Lake Huron and the Detroit River to local Flint River water. This decision is what predicated the lead fallout. Flint water from the river is highly corrosive and it's very difficult to treat. And so it led to leaching of lead from the iron pipes throughout the city, unleashing a torrent of toxins which entered the bodies of the most vulnerable population, poor children. So this decision and the subsequent very slow response to remedy the situation are, narrowly speaking, a technical error, one that might have been avoided in theory by better engineering. Say, all we need is better engineering and everything will be fine. Right? It's very tempting to think this way. But to let the issue stand there as a narrowly technical problem is a disservice to any hope of improving policies for water management. This is because the source of the problem rests in a complex interlacing of class and race issues, a political ecology of the water system which made this horrific outcome one that is likely to be repeated again and again and again throughout the United States, a place with the 7th highest GDP per capita in the world. Again and again. So, these are the questions I'll briefly ask and then take on some other case studies. Why did they change the water supply? Why was the city in a fiscal crisis to begin with? Why weren't the lead pipes replaced? Why was Flint River water so corrosive? Why did the city take so long to respond? Only by asking and answering those hugely political questions can we have any hope. And these are the questions asked and answered by Laura Polito and Melina Ranganathan, who are terrific scholars of the question. And they argue that structural forces are at work. So only by attending to those causal factors can we unravel the puzzle. Why, after all, did the city change the water in the first place? They had perfectly good water supply in Lake Huron. As it turns out, the reason is that the city was under the control of an emergency fiscal manager, EFM, an authority empowered to govern the municipality with little oversight or control from the public and no control from the city's residents. When the city is deemed, and the city achieves this status, when it is deemed by the governor of the state to have entered this situation. Autocratic, single decision. Here's the governor. According to Michigan's Public Act 436, this falls under the authority of the governor, who at the height of this debacle was venture capitalist Rick Snyder. Here he is. In other words, the decision was made by a political appointee in an undemocratic process in a situation of fiscal desperation. In an effort to save a mere $18 million in water costs, the city was poisoned. That was the savings received by changing the water supply. So why was the city in a fiscal crisis to begin with? Certainly the movement of capital from the city has been long and ongoing through deindustrialization, but its segregated inner areas were created by racist city planners as far back as the 1950s and 60s, as well as the Homeowners Loan Corporation and the Federal Housing Authority, who notoriously redlined these neighborhoods. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with redlining, the Federal Housing Authority empowered the Homeowners Loan Corporation to draw maps of major United States municipalities to determine risks for subsidies for housing and mortgage support. And these maps were all hand-drawn by white men walking around the districts of the city, and what you'll find are the areas in red here in Flint are all African-American majority residences. So none of these people were eligible for mortgage support, housing support, investment, or loans, and urban decay followed magically within the next 30 years. Hand-drawn, red-lined maps. This is not unique to Flint, and I believe that wherever you find red-lined maps, you're going to find lead poisoning. Certainly, these red-line maps were bad for African-American communities, but more generally for urban decay, what you really have is underinvestment. And underinvestment leads essentially to fiscal crisis, especially when certain industries leave the city. So why weren't the lead pipes replaced? Well, the emptying out of the city's tax base, as I've just described, turns out to have been further expedited by white voters who fled to the city's suburbs, leaving largely African-American communities at the center of the tax base. And those white voters refused, on many occasions, to vote for infrastructural investments that would have replaced lead pipes, as they have been replaced in Madison, Wisconsin, and Chicago, and other cities around the United States. Continuously denied increases in taxes. And the absence of those taxes made it impossible to maintain the critical infrastructure, including the city's pipes. So why is Flint River water so corrosive? Well, the water quality of the Flint River has long been affected by industrial contamination, making the water both corrosive and difficult to treat. And this goes all the way back to General Motors Corporation. That degradation came throughout the 20th century as a hidden natural subsidy, a subsidy of nature, to the automobile industry, whose manufacturing sites expelled industrial waste directly into the Flint River. And as a result, Lake Huron water has been used rather than local Flint water for decades, sensibly, because the water is toxic. Why did the city then take so long to respond? And it did. It took a long time. Throughout the crisis, the city refused to accept that there was something wrong with the water supply. There were these press conferences, right, where they would come out and drink the water. Right? That's the city officials saying, it's fine, everything's fine, don't worry about it. This was even after General Motors reported that the water was so corrosive that its industrial manufacturing plant was suffering through the use of the water. So General Motors was allowed to go back to Lake Huron water where the residents of the city were not. Just a side note during this whole thing. And throughout, officials really thought that this was essentially a protest against austerity, which in a sense, of course, it was, but really it's about life and death issues about the quality of water. And a side note here that Graciela brought to my attention, in 2015, partway through this crisis, the international corporation Veolia, a French multinational, was brought in to deal with the water question. And on several occasions, Veolia also went before the microphone and said that there was no problem with the water. I understand that they manage half your water. Good luck with that. The discourse that dominated official understandings insisted that the residents were merely mounting, again, a critique of austerity. In short, toxic exposure is rooted in corroding pipes from neglected infrastructure resulting from an eroding tax base associated with white flight and racialized redlining of housing markets. Toxic water comes from source decisions made by autocratic authorities empowered by a financial crisis created by the same urban development policies. Urged on by austerity discourse and embedded by a discourse of expertise, local residents were simply not smart enough to know that their water was clean, right? This slowed response. Housing policy is water policy. Tax policy is water policy. Industrial policy is water policy. Michigan's Public Act 436 is water policy. Political economy matters, racism matters, discourse matters, political ecology matters. And political ecology, if it's defined anyway, it's like boxes and arrows. That's like political ecology too. Thousands of boxes and arrows. So what is political ecology? I guess somebody asked me to tell you, so I'm going to do my best. I'm not a political ecologist. So political ecology has a lot of definitions, and most of them aren't especially useful. This one down here I actually think is pretty good. This is Bridge, McCarthy, and Perot, who describe it as an environmental research field marked by a set of common commitments to critical social theory, to in-depth, direct observation using largely qualitative methods. I take issue with that. And a normative commitment to social justice and structural political change. I do not take issue with that. A better definition is probably the shorter one. This is the classic from Blakey and Brookfield in 1989. Who has read this book? I don't think it's even in print anymore. Oh, this is Land Degradation in Society. It's a key work, actually. It's a great book. It combines some of the earliest work on common property is in there, Joda and others. It combines the concerns of ecology with a broadly defined political economy. That's nice. That's nice and simple. So think ecology, think political economy, keep those two thoughts in your head, and you're thinking political ecology. Now, in the period since 1989, political ecology has become a global kind of amoeba. We see it everywhere, and we see it in different flavors. And I really want to highlight that most of the energy in political ecology, so far as I can tell, is currently European. I believe that most of the action has been de-anglicized, which is always a good thing. We see networks like Entitle here, which includes key branches in Barcelona and elsewhere, as well as Pollen, this international network of political ecology scholars. They hold periodic meetings. I would recommend attendance. They are truly global in nature, with folks coming from Asia, Africa, Latin America, and elsewhere. So it's an enormous going concern, political ecology. It's become, it has many faces, and it has different themes. But I would say in practical terms, political ecology does share some tools in a kind of general toolbox. First among these is the notion that socio-environmental outcomes and configurations don't just happen. They don't just happen, but they're driven to these configurations by key drivers and structural conditions. Chemical runoff from neatly groomed lawns, right? It's not some cultural accident in America. It is a dumping ground for agrochemical companies who have flatlined their sales elsewhere in the world. It is a search for new markets. It's not some quirk of the American culture. It has a structural driver. Second, political ecology tends to highlight that environmental outcomes often entail winners and losers, and that people and ecosystems that gain resources, inputs, and protection often do so at the expense of other such people and systems. The desolation of Southeast Asian forests and their attendant pressures on indigenous populations in particular fuel a globally circulating palm oil industry. It's not an accident. Third, political ecology urges us to think in terms of human and non-human dialectics. And I mean this in the classically Marxian or Hegelian sense, meaning that both people and things are mutually transformed by their interaction. Things, like water, are not discrete objects, but are instead processes. Water is a process, formed by relationships. The city of Chicago, for example, is created and constituted by the oceans of grain and meat that flow into it, even as these materials are constituted by the threshing machines, iron rails, and tarmac roads that make up the city itself. That's Bill Cronin's Nature's Metropolis. Fourth, and this is the trickiest of the trickster tricks, political ecology tends to make specific claims about the state of nature, science claims about the state of water, lead, for example, categorical, physically true, measurable claims about nature, while also making claims about the state of nature. That is, we're studying material conditions, but also the systems of knowledge and belief that govern how we come to know those material conditions. So, holding in one hand the material reality of the world, and holding in the other its highly discursive constitution, and allowing those two to dialogue, even though they are epistemologically contradictory. And that's fine. The 1990s are over. We can all go back to work. So, for example, Diana Davis, who is a political ecologist of North Africa, has demonstrated, by borrowing paleontological records, that human beings did not create the Sahara Desert, or the northern Sahara. It was caused by climate change. But she spends a balance of her work studying the people who continue to insist that the Sahara Desert was caused by Arabs, right? This sort of racist narrative, which comes from Nancy. It comes from French forestry traditions, just for the record. Not to say that the British aren't involved as well. Notably, political ecology, I will finish here, is critically reflexive. This means that political ecologists carefully attend to their own subject positions as researchers, activists, or those with or without male privilege, white privilege, and so on, and the impact those positions have upon their work. Second, political ecology is explicitly normative insofar as it operates under the assumption that there are better, more sustainable, and more just outcomes possible in the world, and that research that doesn't direct us to those ends is problematic. I've spent my career working at land-grant universities precisely for this reason. Even so, political ecology asserts the need for rigorously empirical investigation, even if real objectivity is always elusive. So within those bounds, the themes of political ecology are numerous, and I've laid them out elsewhere. They're about how the marginalization of some populations and the degradation of their resources are intertwined. Obviously, the case of Flint is categorically an example of this. How conservation, things that are supposed to be good for nature, often are really about the exercise of territoriality, control, and expropriation, or primitive accumulation, if I may stick with my marks. Environmental conflict, that is, how conflicts between people become environmentalized, pre-existing conflicts, and how environmental conflicts actually become political and social crises. They investigate environmental subjects and identities, that is, the way interaction with the environment creates subject positions and identities within individuals, communities, nations. And there is a high prize on political objects and actors, that is, taking very seriously non-human agency, the particular qualities of water mattering, the engineering of the pipes mattering to the social and environmental outcomes, and not being some sidebar in a social science sense. So this is political ecology, all right? good definition, but that's what you're going to work with. If you're going to stick with me, that's what I got. So, I'm now going to give you 4 very brief case studies to show how these things are animated by colleagues whose work I respect greatly. This is Danish Mustafa and Philip Reeder working in Belize. In 2001, I'm sure most of you are familiar with this case. In 2001, the government of Belize turned the water utility of Belize City over to an Anglo-Dutch multinational. That sort of was the game plan back in the early 2000s everywhere. I saw a number of papers on Cochabamba here. This is a less well-known case. Cascade, this was the corporation in question, effectively privatizing water and sewerage services for the 70,000 residents of the city, actually for the whole country. Belize is not too big. The experiment failed. It's one of dozens of privatization efforts in Latin America that failed. You would know them better than I would. But presumably it was because of public resistance, that is, a social response. So the question then becomes, what drove this social response? Is this simply economic rationality? Were people just not getting the services that they had been promised? To find out, you actually have to do work. You have to go into communities, diverse communities, and try to understand how people remembered, imagined, and dealt with the privatization. And that's where Dinesh and Philip step in. They tackle this question through qualitative research, and their first finding is terrifically clear. People did feel that there had been little or no improvement in their water, even though they were promised improvement, and the prices went up. So there is an economic rationality to their response. They didn't get what they were promised. But digging deeper, most of the material that people really wanted to disgorge to the researchers felt a little different. It had a different valence than economic rationality. The government should stop spending stolen money in other countries and use it on infrastructure. Fix all the drains, not just the ones on the politicians' streets. For the most part, the responses, in short, were not about the company or private capital or even markets. They were about the state. They were about the failure of the state to provision basic needs in water. The second quote is quite good. What was the reason? The reason was to rip off people. They keep selling our assets. So many of the responses were also national in nature. That is, the notion of shared or collective resources being, and most importantly, being spirited away out of country. And now we begin to hear the post-colonial valence of these kinds of responses. An identitarian national response, both to state corruption, but also to a notion of a nation or a national water resource. And the third, I think, is the most poignant. If it were left to them, they would have sold us. Keep in mind that Belize is really as much a part of Latin America, it's really a Caribbean nation. And the memory of slavery in the region is not that far away. Belize was decolonized, I think, in 1981, is that correct? Something very recent. So a history of colonialism, a notion of a national political economy, an identity tinged with a history of ownership. That is why people respond, and that's a political ecology. It's not simply about water services. And indeed, the interesting story is that when the Belize water system was re-nationalized, 84% of the shares were bought back. Really, things didn't change very much. It's still a market-based approach. The prices are still higher and the delivery is still poor, but people are much more satisfied. I think that tells you a great deal. So unfortunately, studying political ecology does make you a better autocratic, evil overlord. Just the same way studying Marx can make you a better capitalist, in any case. My second case focuses less on conflict over a specific resource or ecosystem, but instead a struggle over ideas. Right? This issue of nature, but also stories about nature. Rebecca Lave's book, and I strongly recommend it to you, Field and Streams, describes a really nasty conflict over methods used for stream restoration in the United States. Now this is, to be clear, this is a multi-billion-dollar business. Stream restoration is a big capitalist undertaking. As a field, it focuses on fixing hydrologic messes that have been made by people in the past, restoring destroyed streams by applying engineering and design principles to alter hydrologic flow. It's a field filled with practitioners and with professionals and many, many scientists. Now, as it happens, the most prominent of all of these people in the entire field of stream restoration in the United States anyway, is a man with no formal degree in the field named Dave Roskin. He's a real cowboy. So this is Dave Roskin. If you know how to do do stream restoration, or you were trained in it to carry it out, you were probably trained by Dave Rosgen or one of his acolytes using his textbook in a short course that you probably paid for. This, I'm not exaggerating to say that most stream restorationists were trained by one man. That is quite remarkable. Rosgen is internationally famous for developing a restoration technique called natural channel design, is what it's called. This approach uses rock and woody materials to stabilize stream banks in a particular way, right? It's a particular technique, all right? It's been adopted by local, state, and federal water management authorities throughout the US, and Rosgen, as a consultant, has made quite a bit of money and trained a variety of professionals, as I've suggested. The problem is that Rosgen's approach is universally derided and despised by most scientists in the field of stream hydrology. So if you go to the universities, they will say it is snake oil. This is I think a distinctly United States term, an American term. Snake oil sales in the Wild West would bottle, grease and tar and sell it to people as a special healing remedy, the oil of snakes. So this is the term they use for his approach. They believe it has no scientific merit, and that conflict then between the scientific community and Rosgen's community has been really fierce. Arguments break out at meetings, pointed critiques are written, university experts are unusually emotional in their opposition. So enter Rebecca Lay. She asked the question, where does this conflict come from? How did this person get to where they are? And what does that mean for science as it's practiced in communities? Right? What are the implications of this for doing work? So how can a non-scientifically trained expert come to dominate water management? And second, where does vociferous resistance come from? And what's interesting here, right, is that the science is out on this. Rosgen's method actually might work. We don't know. The science is there's been very few studies, but he insists it works, and they insist it doesn't. And the facts have not yet developed to kind of sort out this kind of scientific conflict. So to answer this, Lay conducts an intensive ethnographic and historical political ecology. She studies the actors, the journals. She conducts oral histories with agency personnel and scientists, spends time with these folks, and reconstructs the emergence of this relatively young field. She concludes that the rise of restoration as a practice did not emerge from the academy. It emerged instead from political economy. In the 1970s, the Clean Water Act was written in the United States, and it has a remarkable little proviso in it that says that if you degrade through industrial or agricultural development a stream length, it must be restored, or a concomitant amount of stream has to be restored. It's very similar to the wetlands pieces of the Clean Water Act, for those of you interested in law. That means suddenly, anytime you disturb a stream, there's an enormous business for cleaning it up. And flowing into that business, because no such field existed previously, come consultants. Armies and armies of private consultants. And they need a language to speak. They need a common dictionary. They need a common method. They need an identity that can legitimately allow them to conduct their business on contract with farmers, states, localities. Well, Rosgen stepped in at exactly the right time. He provided essentially a textbook, a roadmap through which people could follow to make claims on state resources and meet the letter of the Clean Water Act. So thousands and thousands of stream lengths have been repaired using Rosgen's approach. Not coming anywhere from the academy, possibly with good hydrology associated with it, possibly not. But it's an entirely extra academic undertaking. Now we can begin to understand why the academy feels so threatened. Because at the same time, as this business explodes, suddenly federal granting agencies equally are interested in the science of stream restoration. The National Science Foundation, countless other federal agencies are pouring money into laboratories, in universities, to do better science on fluvial hydromorphology, all these kinds of scientific fields. Suddenly had a lot of valence. They were kind of sleepy. Now they've got a killer application, as they say in the software industry. Something they can do that's worth something. The problem is they've already been locked out by the private sector. So their vision of how science should operate, that is the geomorphologist's vision, right, is that the academy produces knowledge which are then circulated and applied by practitioners. When in fact, as we better know through Lay's history, what happens are entrepreneurial knowledge actors operating within a political economy can produce and advance fields of knowledge that both secure resources and capital, but also expertise, prestige, challenging, in many cases, academic knowledge, but at the same time, generating energy for new academic knowledge, more money into hydrogen morphology, right? So this is a political economy that, in a sense, contradicts many of the assumptions not only of scientists, but actually of state practitioners who draw on scientific knowledge to do stuff like fix streets. Right? Political ecology points us towards power knowledge. Yes, we still read Foucault in the States. I know nobody else does. Okay. I could say something about how this approach is more generally useful. It provides us with a way to explore expertise about water changes over time and the way it's subject to forces within the larger political economy, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that here. The approach is definitely applicable to numerous areas of disagreement about water systems and policy making, and I would urge us to think with Rebecca Lave's hat on when we think about political economy and ecology of water in the Americas. All right, my third case of four, and these two are shorter, okay? Because it's hot in here, huh? My third case is one examining access to water in the United States. And this work is by, who we have here? Shiloh Dietz and Catherine Meehan, who is a graduate of the University of Arizona, actually. So what are they doing here? They remind us that household water insecurity, that is, non-access to water, safe, reliable, and sufficient water for a thriving life, is of course a global threat to human health and development. But many people continue to refuse to believe that the problem exists in the United States of America, one of the world's wealthiest countries, but it does. So in 2016, about 463,000 occupied households lacked plumbing connection to potable water and sewage in the US. That's households. That's roughly 1.5 million Americans that have no water. All right? That is comparable to the population of the fifth largest city in the country, Phoenix. There's a whole city of people, a giant megalopolis of people in the United States who do not have access to water. So don't feel bad if your country doesn't have access to water. Apparently nobody does. The political ecological question is, who are these households and why are they unserved? Sort of the winner or loser story is pretty stark insofar as citizens with no access to water live in a country where, as I noted, the GDP per capita is among the highest in the world. So to get the answer, so that's a political economy question. To get the answer requires both rigorous quantitative and spatially explicit research. But it would also necessarily attend to questions of justice and be guided by hypotheses that begin with issues of inequity. So in other words, political ecology, but generating what I'll show you is a far more mathematically and quantitatively sound set of answers. Are minority communities, for example, differentially affected? Is it only rural areas? You have to do spatiometrics to get that kind of an answer. So Meehan and Dietz tackle this question, and the way they do it is much too detailed, and we have to talk a little bit about spatial autocorrelation, and there are geographers in the room. So, pretty hardcore quantitative spatial analysis. But basically what it does is you have to extract statistically significant spatial clusters, so controlling for autocorrelation, and then extract demographic values correlated or counter-correlated with plumbing, what they call plumbing poverty, right? These could then be used to map the probability that a certain kind of household, like a poor household or a Hispanic household or a household in a particular area, would be plumbing poor. And some of the answers are quite startling. Notably, it's not a rural problem, which is very surprising. It is not a rural. Among households with incomplete plumbing, 73% are located in metropolitan areas. These are city dwellers without water, all right? 11% are in mid-sized cities, 7% are in small towns, only 9% are rural. So the first assumption, this is a rural problem, absolutely not. Only 1.5% of households in the US are indigenous, that is native peoples, either residents of native nations or living off of national land. But among households, among the plumbing incomplete, 6.2% are American Indian or Native Alaskan. This is a problem foisted on indigenous communities, in short. Similarly, 12.8% of US households are black, whereas 16% of those with incomplete plumbing are black. Hispanic-headed households are only 12% of the United States, but 16% of those with incomplete plumbing. Households with incomplete plumbing have lower incomes. And although mobile homes are only occupied by 5.8%, about 6% of the US, it's twice that high to be without plumbing. So being in any of these categories makes you statistically significantly more likely to not have access to water and sewage. Okay, this suggests, it seems to me, a structural problem, right? This is not an accident. These outcomes don't just happen. But also one that's rooted in regional and sometimes very local policy and water economics. So this is where the maps get kind of interesting. So this is controlling, and again, I cannot do Katie's work enough credit all by myself, so I won't try to cut into her. You should just have her in for a talk to walk you through these data. But what these maps tell you is that controlling for everything else within a category, a particular category, say Native American or African American, there are regional specific outcomes. So if you're black, you're much more likely to not have plumbing if you live in the South than in the North. If you're a Native American, you're much more likely to not have plumbing in the Southwest than in the Northeast. I mean, that's the big reservation up here, Navajo Nation, and so on. So what it suggests here, and this is just touching the tip of it, is 1 million political ecology questions about how regional political economy of water works, how it's governed, how state laws vary, how municipal development services vary, how the specificities of the history of things like, again, redlining in urban inner cities might lead to underinvestment, which might lead then to plumbing poverty. There are 1 million political ecologies right here, merely in this analysis of the US. So what this suggests for the value of political ecology is twofold, and I'll get to my last case and free you. First, it shows that highly normative, justice-focused questions rooted in critical social theory and a structural view of socio-ecological process, Marxist, feminist, post-colonial theory, are amenable to rigorous quantitative and spatially explicit analysis. You can do the science even if you're in a normative place, right? Hold those two things in your head at the same time. It also suggests that the answers to such questions can pinpoint jurisdictional contexts that can animate policy, agitation, and social action. In other words, if you want to solve this problem, you know where to go and who to talk to, right off the bat. So finally, I want to consider a question related to water scarcity and climate change, especially in the US West. So throughout much of the region, and indeed the country as a whole, the central discussion of the last few decades has been a consideration of dam removal. I believe there'll be a paper on dam removal tomorrow. Is that person here? I am very much looking forward to it. Dam removal is a going concern in the United States. People are pulling out dams at a remarkable rate. So the storage capacity that has taken a century to build is now going out. So this is the number of dams. This is the hydroelectric capacity of the United States. You can see, you know, the late 1800s, it was all sort of mom and pop, little micro dams. And then something happens, right, in the 20th century, and it is the Bureau of Reclamation and the Army Corps of Engineers, giant federal authorities impounding and capturing an enormous amount of hydropower, but also water available for municipal development and so on. These dams go in at an outrageous rate. It is modernity written in concrete. And then, boop, it all stops, right? In the early 21st century, the dams stopped getting built. Several things happen that I'm going to hint at here, but one of the things is that the Bureau of Reclamation, has anybody ever heard of the Bureau of Reclamation? No one in the United States has ever heard of the Bureau of Reclamation, but it was probably the most powerful agency for a century. Is rendered entirely invisible, its budgets disappear, and it has lost a reason to exist, which is one strong argument for why they've gotten into the dam removal business. The Bureau of Reclamation and the Army Corps are both leaders in the dam removal business. That's not the story I want to tell right now, but it's worth noting that there's a political ecology to agency power of water in the dam business in the United States. Here's a dam being removed here. This is the largest dam removal in U.S. history on the Elbow River in Washington State. This is only partway through its removal, but this was a big impoundment. All right. So, as I said, dam removal is the story. But a recent study by Danielle Perry and Sarah Kraskovich suggests an interesting counter-trend, a push for large-scale water storage. Right? All this water storage behind dams is going away, but the urge for water storage has not gone away. New projects typically do not mimic the traditional dams that I just described, but more often come in the form of what's called auxiliary infrastructural projects such as dam augmentation, taking an existing dam, increasing its capacity without increasing its footprint, which is a trick, and aquifer storage and recovery, ASR, and that's the one I want to address most directly. I told you what dam augmentation is. Here's what, and there's the Bureau of Rec, and there's the Army Corps. So this is what augmentation does. Aquifer storage and recovery work to bank surface water during high flow periods, typically by diverting surface flows and injecting the surplus into confined aquifers. This is done around the world, but it's being done on an industrial scale in the United States. So what happens is, during high recharge periods, right, you actually have a giant infrastructural apparatus. It's not, you know, I mean, there are large areas where you have natural infiltration, but actually there's a lot of machinery involved. They're pumping high injection wells, pushing water down into the aquifer. And then during low periods of drought, you then draw that water back out of the bank. So all of the above ground infrastructure is vanishing, but the below ground infrastructure is flourishing. And this sort of shows you a hydrograph of it. You go into a drought period, and then when you hit a certain trigger level, you begin to then pull and augment the water supply out of ASR. And then when the drought ends, you can go back to banking. Okay? Now, policymakers and water managers have pivoted towards these forms as a new hydrological economy. The reasons for this are both obvious and kind of subtle. So I'll try to go through them in a political ecology, and then I'll sum up and end my talk. As Perry and Praskovich show, the central issue for many developed world contexts is actually a new crunch on water resources presented by climate change. This is the drought, the endless drought in the U.S. Southwest. Tucson's been banking water, actually, in its aquifer for decades. Its share of the Colorado River by compact is almost all pushed into the ground for later withdrawal. The sustained drought conditions throughout the Southwest and Mountain West have put many existing storage facilities in a perilous position. You see those bathtub rings on the main above ground dams. They're not very useful anymore. This is coupled with the remarkable demographic growth of most of this arid region of the West. Of the 11 states with the fastest growing population in the United States, 8 of them are in the U.S. West. 8 of them are effectively in the drought zone. Right? But rather than turn to adaptation and demand-side management, that is, conservation, right? Instead of turning towards these methods, the bureaucratic habits established in the dam growth era of the 20th century are grafted onto a new suite of technologies. Big infrastructure, large bureaucratic apparatus, capital investment, and the deferral of the challenge of managing overuse of the existing resource, right? Does that sound familiar? That's the 20th century written into a new technology for the 21st century without actually addressing any of the structural contradictions within the capitalist water infrastructure. So this supply side thinking, which accompanies this push for more storage, is a product of course, very real challenges of climate change, but taking the form of the bureaucratic logics of the Army Corps and the Bureau of Rec. This is the Bureau of Reclamation's webpage. It's a great place to visit. I mean, it's just one big dam with an American flag. So even though they're in a new business, which is dam removal and ASR, the state logics that continue to accompany capital development go right unaddressed and are just grafted into this new technology. As Perry and Praskovich describe it, and I'm quoting, a continuation of the same high modernist water management practices that led to large reclamation projects in the US. That's a political ecology of water. Okay, so a brief review of political ecology as an approach to water in the Americas suggests that it has some utility. All right, there is some utility to political ecology. I wrote a book called Political Ecology, so I have to say that to sell books. It draws our attention to inequality and structural discrimination by race and class, and I would add colonial and post-colonial and discriminated indigenous communities, as it does in Flint. It attends not only to the way social actors respond to things in the economy, like the price of water, but also their identity, notions of national power, and relationships to the state. That's the Belize case. Political ecology points to how knowledge of nature and social and political power are intertwined through expertise, all within a changing political economy. That's the case of stream restoration. It encourages to form radical hypotheses to submit to rigorous science, as it does in the case of Catherine Meehan's Plumbing 4, and it invites us to stress the logics of state and capital when explaining techno-environmental projects and solutions confronting climate change. as it does in the auxiliary infrastructural projects I described last. So there's a lot of value in the political ecology tradition. But political ecology cannot do everything. It's a thing you do sometimes when you need to. It can't be a recipe for a universal approach to, especially to something as complex as water resources. While Flint's water is ultimately a matter of racialized political economy, it's also an engineering problem. There will be engineers involved in this conversation, whether you like it or not. Though Belize's city's failure in privatizing water is a result of social struggle, the utility still has to deliver water, which is an economic and policy problem. Stream restoration is contested, but ultimately there are better and worse ways of managing streams. There is a hydrology to the stream flow, which requires hydrologic research to uncover. Plumbing inequalities can be revealed, but to solve them are going to require social and technical programs. What the programs entail may necessarily involve high modernist infrastructure, just like the Army Corps recommends, as exhibited in the projects I showed you. So in short, political ecology cannot do all of this alone. What's required instead is a political ecological component to investigations of water in the Americas. This component needs to drive and be driven by other modes of investigation and other research traditions, ranging from engineering to, as I suggested, spatial modeling. Engineers, unfortunately, I was discussing this with somebody earlier, do not typically speak the language of political economy or political ecology, and on occasion, they do not share the same epistemology or ontology with that field in its texts. Now, that's unfortunate, but it's inevitable. Even so, I would encourage us to think about the role of political ecology differently. Rather than thinking about political ecology as a specialized body of knowledge or a specific approach or a kind of human specialist, the political ecologist, I would encourage it that we consider it as a moment within research and practice, a kind of critical reflection in our own investigations. Engineers should sometimes do political ecology. Sociologists could sometimes do political ecology, right? Geologists and geophysicists and stream flow hydrologists could sometimes do political ecology. A moment, maybe a long moment, of critical reflection and analysis that puts context, history, and power in dialogue with engineering, hydrology, and geophysics. No project should be devoid, in short, of political ecology, and yet no project should proceed with political ecology as its entirety. Knowing exactly when and how to think with political ecology is the real challenge. Like, when do you turn the switch on, and when do you turn it off? And making it to a wider audience is the other major challenge. But having lived in and around this field for the last 30 years, I can tell you it is not going away. Thank you very much. What happens now?
We propose to do some questions now, and I will invite Professor Campufo to lead the question and responses. Now, okay.
Yeah?
Ask the questions.
Let's do it.
So, first question.
I can handle a question in French. I don't think I can handle it in Spanish.
Because I prepared and had to read plenty of things he wrote, and not only handbook, but there was a paper that I like very much, and I would think that is a good way to open the questions answer debate. Why do you talk about political ecology as a trickster science?
Okay. So that's a good question. Does everybody understand the word, when I use the word trickster, it comes from Anglo-American ethnographic and folklore studies. It's a category of being from every culture in the world. Almost every culture in the world has a trickster figure. So the trickster, right, is a troublemaker, troublemaking character. I believe in French we have Renard, the fox. A troublemaking character, but actually often delivers lots of positive outcomes, but often does all kinds of negative troublemaking, right? So the Western Plains Indians have coyote. Prometheus from the Greeks is effectively a trickster. Who else is there? Anansi the spider in West Africa. Okay, so it's like this troublemaker that's always making trouble for the main characters, who are like the king or God or whoever it is, right? So there's always somebody making trouble. That's what political ecology is. So political ecology works closely alongside fluvial hydromorphology, climate science, right? Spatial epidemiology. It embraces these other fields. And in fact, tricksters often change their identity to pretend they're somebody else. So they present themselves as hydrologists, effectively, or water experts, when in fact, right, what they're doing is they're advancing knowledge in a good way, and then always undermining their friends. That is the role of political ecology, is to adopt the hydrology, to help the hydrologist, and then at the end of the day, to show that the hydrologist is practicing colonial capitalist exploitation and delivering both of those messages at the same time, which is to say, having it both ways. That's what political ecology is. It's a very unsatisfying, for many people, this is what they don't like about political ecology, that it has a very tricky, flexible epistemology, and therefore can't be trusted. And in a sense, that's true. I don't think you can trust political ecology, and I think that's why we need it. Right? It can't just be critique. If it's only critique, I mean, Latour's quite clear on this, if it's only critique, then it's useless. It has to advance scientific knowledge. But if it's only advancing scientific knowledge, then it's only going to scientific knowledge is only going to reproduce the 20th century dam building era. Does that make any sense? No? Okay.
But one of the questions, maybe from that starting point, is in which measure can political ecology help us to devise some kind of solution, let's say, for some of the problems you showed in your presentation?
So yes, I think it can. Tanya Lee is very good on this. Her book, The Will to Improve, is that? The Will to Improve, it's an excellent book on critical development theory and practice. And her students always ask her, why don't you provide solutions in that book? And her answer is, you know, that's not the right place for it. This is political ecology. My job here is to undermine everything that's going wrong. But then in her next moment, right, she's actually working on development practice, on cooperative building and community reconstruction, with the lessons in mind of all the failures that development brings with it. So I think, yeah, political ecology can, but I think we can't expect it to always do everything all at once. I think that's the problem. That's what I mean by going back and forth. It's a lot for any field to ask.
You talk about, or the mention of the relationality between humans and non-humans, the dialectics between humans and non-humans. So, how can we fit in the focus you gave us all these new approaches that some scholars are following on multi-species relationships, for example, particularly Mario Blaser, Arturo Escobar, Marisol de la Cadena. How do you take on board all these approaches on your proposal? And my second question is, do you embrace this perspective on ontological difference, and how can we overcome all these issues that are tackled by the scholars working on the ontological gap?
Yeah, that's a big question. Books have been written on this question and by people smarter than me. I just make some comments about that. I think it's been both very easy and very hard for political ecology to embrace the more than human. Easy because it's always been a materialist scholarship. It has always taken seriously objects and actors. It has a Marxist tradition which allows it dialectics, which I believe is its unique tool for thinking about that, right? Right out of volume 1, we know that humanity and the soil are both transformed literally by their interaction. Right? People are physically changed by their interaction with soils. And soils are themselves anthropogenic. They are a product of human action. That can easily be brought into a story about development failure and about all kinds of things that political ecologists are interested in. That's the easy part. I think there has been a really highly successful interdigitation of the more than human and political ecology, and I could cite some scholars, but that's the easy part. The hard part actually is that the Marx part. Marx doesn't actually have that much room for the more than human, and despite being given a lot of credit for inventing ecology, he didn't. And we debate this all the time in our reading group. Every year we read volume 1 with students. And it's pretty clear that chickens don't labor. They can only work. So all of these non-humans really get collapsed into a category of work, essentially. They do work. It sounds almost like ecosystem services. You know? That's very hard for them to be, they can't be wage labor. I think robots are more interesting. Like, I'm much more interested in robots in that regard, but leaving them aside, the non-human, if you're quite doctrinaire in your reading of important texts in critical theory, there's not as much wiggle room for the non-human as people pretend. If you really take it seriously, if you really begin to get to some pretty fundamental questions about social and economic process, that's the hard part. And I think that people haven't embraced how hard it is. They just say, oh, well, I'll just adopt this and take on that, and they wind up with a lot of contradictory ontological assumptions. I'm okay with contradictory assumptions. Most of you are not, probably. So that's my answer, is that there has been good work on trying to bring these fields together, but I think they bump up against certain really strong categorical claims that come out of critical theory. Like, you know, I mean, it's the bee versus the architect. It's classic Marxist text. There's this schismatic divide in that tradition between the human and the non-human. But again, throughout all of that work, there's an acknowledgement that the soil is exploited the same way the farmer is. So they haven't, I mean, I'm just saying that I don't think it's been done well, but I think it's been done a lot. How's that? Having said that, I'll finish. The people in animal studies and some of these related fields that are driven largely around ethics have an enormously shallow notion, I've said that on camera now, of political economy, gender power, and social process. I think, you know, I saw a paper presented at one of these AAG sessions where some graduate student said that slaughterhouse workers, you know, are evil and they should walk away from their jobs, right? And this is animal studies. I mean, it's remarkably normative, and I get the ethic, but it doesn't show a very good understanding of how those people got into those slaughterhouses, or the animals, right? As if it was all just ethical choices. So I think that what political ecology is good for is to embrace our brothers and sisters in animal studies and related non-human, but then, you know, trick them, right? I think you gotta embrace them and then undermine them, because they're asking very important ethical questions. So that's my view.
Yes, I've got several questions for you. I really enjoyed your presentation and your case studies. I would have just the impression that, like, I don't know, like Monsieur Jourdain in Inauguration, I felt like I was using prose or doing political ecology without knowing it. So just for me, I just had the impression of what you mean political ecology is just a way for geographers to incorporate social variables. So could you confirm this first question?
It's a subset of that. so because you can incorporate social variables in all kinds of ways. And you could do it one way, and it wouldn't be political ecology.
I was satisfied with that for a geographer.
I mean, if you're a political ecologist and you're happy, then I wish you well, and you should go do your work, you know? The argument I made elsewhere is that political ecology isn't something you do anyway. It's a kind of test. It's a kind of set of claims. So, and what I mean by that is that you go out and research a phenomenon, and you come up with all kinds of things to say about it. You can say quantitative things, qualitative things, historical things, all kinds of things. Only some of what you write about it, or a documentary that you make, is going to be political ecology. And you'll know it when you see it. It's going to show exploitation. It's going to show the power of history. It's going to show the colonial tradition. It's going to show all of that. That'll be the political ecology part. There may be lots of other things that you're doing that aren't political ecology, and that's fine. So I would suggest it's about a certain set of narratives. I'm describing political ecology in other words like I would Gothic literature. You know, it's a way a text is written. And not everybody who writes a Gothic novel only writes Gothic novels. Although some people are really pretty heavy Gothic novels. And that's the same thing as true of political ecology.
So I will go quicker on the second question, which is more about it. And finally, I don't know if it's the effect of the label we give is political ecology. But that's fine. That's part of everything is written in your article anyway, political science. And my third question was more about finally what is this scientific added value of political ecology in water studies? I take the last example you gave us about the drought in the US and all the quantitative data you use. Yeah, this maps, for example, which normally would not be incorporated to political ecology if we follow the first definition you gave, which was qualitative stuff, etc. So
that's why I didn't like that first definition.
Yeah. So one common sense explanation of water conservation policy in the US, in Western United States, would be to say there is a big drought, we have to save water, we're making water banking, etc., etc. But when we study it, and we have made with my team in Arizona a big survey on water issues, on drought management, and we saw that finally the reasons for water conservation were very different in Arizona, for example, where it was promoted by local institutions like Pima County, and on the opposite way in California, water conservation was promoted much more by private operators in order to make water banking, for example. So how do you incorporate such contradiction in political ecology, and what would be your added value in explaining it?
I love your case. Actually, you should compare Pima County with Maricopa County.
Yeah.
Right? Just up the road, you've got a county that's all about water banking and all about supply management. And down the road, you've got one that's all about demand management. It's a contradiction. All good political ecology either starts or ends with such a contradiction. Now you have a series of hypotheses. It's a scientific, there's a lot of scientific potential here. Why does Maricopa County behave the way it does relative to Pima County? Same thing's true of turfgrass, by the way. And it has to do, I would hypothesize, with modes of capitalist development. That they're both entwined in different kinds of development practice, which lead to very different logics in the water sector. And that's just a hypothesis. You'd have to go out and do institutional histories, take a look at where the money flows, interview engineers in both counties. You'd have to do a lot of work to answer your question. But I think that's fine. And that strikes me as terrifically political ecology. But my hypothesis, you heard, was driven by a notion of political economy or whatever. So I think what political ecology helps us do is generate hypotheses, minimally, that can then be tested by any normal means, right? But if you don't have a theory to begin with, then, you know, Maricopa, you could say, oh, people in Maricopa are just wasteful. And people in Pima are really just hippies. And that's sort of true, actually. But that's a very different answer, a very different hypothesis. It's sort of cultural, you know, kind of soft cultural. Well, fine, you go do some surveys. But if you don't have a theory to begin with, it's very hard to begin to answer questions like yours. I think political ecology helps you there, not hurts you. I think it can generate hypotheses that you can test.
But it's not the only way. Right?
No, not the only way. It's one way.
Yeah, no, but I think his question was also, sorry to interrupt.
No, please.
His question was thinking from a sociological point of view, because his team is sociologists, basically. And the beef there is that political ecology is for geographers in general, white sociologists do not have those tools to study similar issues sometimes, right? And so in a way, maybe we're doing the same thing, but we're just different academic fields, and we have pathological science is
I've been in interdisciplinary teams for most of my career, and some of them were total failures, by the way. Just disaster. And some of them really worked really well. There's three ways that I've seen to do interdisciplinary work, and they can all work, but they're a little different. One is everybody just does their own thing, and then you have somebody write a model and like integrate it, some agent-based model. I don't like that approach, but it's been done. A second way is everybody agrees on the same question. That's really hard. The third way is you share an object, and you see what happens. And those are the successful projects. So if you have a sociologist and a geographer. By the way, I don't think political ecology is a geographic field.
Well, but all the ones you presented are geographers.
I know, just they happen to be in my, I ran a Web of Science search and I know these people, but it's very multidisciplinary.
It's true, but just as an example, I'm a PhD student in the University of Arizona in the sociology program, but I'm here also in France, and I know that in the sociology program in the University of Arizona, I had a class on environmental justice, which is a theme that is approached by sociologists, but they both talk about environmental racism, and they will also include political economy in their thinking, right? So in that case, maybe they're doing political ecology, but without knowing it, because they don't ever study political ecology, but they do include political economy.
So I think that's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. That's
It's
totally
just
fine.
not the same people, because they don't publish in the same journals, right?
Well, and that's part of the problem. That's why I wouldn't want political ecology to have its own journal. It does, which I think is unfortunate. I don't think it should have its own journal. I think it should just sort of be making trouble everywhere. So keep making trouble.
Yes, perhaps to go beyond this idea that political ecology is a kind of imperialist activity, I would like to hear more about the conflict you have within your own political ecology community. And I really like the idea that there is different streams within the political ecology. And for instance, your paper on the Eco-Modernist Manifesto, I think it's very interesting to see how you have really different options. I hear that you was not very all right with this community ontological term or something like that. So perhaps you can elaborate a little bit more on this difference that you wanted to give with your paper, no?
Well, let me provide some context. I wrote a paper about something called the Eco-Modernist Manifesto. These are technophiliac, California tech-thinking people who believe that technology can save the world. Maybe they're right. So I wrote a paper saying, that we actually have much more in common than we think. We're all anti-Malthusians. We should all have a conversation. That was that. And I gave a presentation in Oslo recently, similar. And I can tell you, I got booed out of the room. So I got booed out of the room, practically. People were incredibly aggressive and very unhappy. So I would say that my family in political ecology doesn't like certain kinds of arguments. And I have made room for some of those arguments in my thinking as a scholar. And political ecology, that's what I don't want it to be, right, as a tribe. That, you have to carry a particular card to get in. I just don't think that's particularly useful. So the conflicts within political ecology, I think that's one, is that there's some boundary controlling, which I think is unnecessary. I don't think political ecology is important enough to boundary control. But I do think it's got inner conflicts around the extent to which serious feminist scholarship has been embraced and adopted. I actually think that feminist scholarship has gotten short shrift in political ecology. It's been a very masculinized field for quite a while. And that's changing now, rather rapidly. And that's causing, I think, some productive tensions within the field. So as an example, like anything, the dialogue grows. Whatever I say is not very relevant anyway. I'm old. Like most of the people who are doing the interesting work are, coming out of their dissertation. And I think whatever they're doing is what matters. But I do feel some tensions personally with some of the arguments I've come to make over the last few years and what I hear from some political ecologists. I'm quite engaged in this question of robots, for example. I honestly think robots are inevitable, so we might as well use our Marxist and feminist thinking caps to to make them emancipatory instead of non-emancipatory, instead of part of the engine of labor exploitation? That's a big question, but to begin to even ask that question, you get boos. Because robots are bad, technology's bad. So I've just expressed as much frustration as I've ever expressed.
No, perhaps you can just make the point on that one point we're talking about technology and scale.
Yes. Political ecologists are, to the degree that something exists called political ecologists, they have a tendency towards localized romance. That is, I'm going to say, that the solutions are local, that everything is different, right? And therefore, everything needs to be treated at a kind of high level of resolution. And some technologies operate at scale. Nuclear power, dams. And trying to reconcile this approach to communities and certain kinds of technologies is rather difficult when you're actually trying to make policy. When you're actually saying, here's what we ought to do. The rejection of nuclear power on the part of most of my colleagues in political ecology as an impossible solution, because it's a supply-side solution, just like I just critiqued, right? Because it scales, it's impossible for a community to have a nuclear reactor, which is not true. My point here is that there are habits of scalar thinking which are built into communities of thought. That's all. Yes?
Thank you both for your talk and the way you work all these water studies in a nutshell. Maybe I can say that you are very lucky to have, if I may say, an outsider from water studies that is looking at water studies. And my question would be, what struck you when coming from forest studies and animal studies, when you are looking at all this scholarship in water? Can you bring us your thoughts about what is specific, or is there nothing specific about water?
What a great question. Let me tell you in 2 days after I heard this talk. But, when I went out and did this, I just did this literature review, basically, Graciela, so I can give you a talk. This is all from scratch. I'm making this up as I go along. I am struck by several things. One is the role and diversity of law. I think law and water go together like, kids and dogs. And that is not always true. If there's forest law, and I work with forest policies of various kinds, but water and water law, you learn so much about law by studying water, and so much about water studying the law, I think. That's a unique, it's not unique. I mean, there's law about everything, of course. But there's something about water that creates institutional necessities of apparatus that make it useful to work with. So that's one thing I would observe. You need to know a lot more about law in all of those cases, by the way, to make any sense of them at all, right? Prior appropriation versus, riparian law in the U.S. West and East is a huge issue. The civil law tradition, right, versus common law. Latin American is a civil law tradition. North America, I don't know, Mexico's civil law as well, so I guess the United States and Canada are the common law countries. Wow, how big a difference does that make when it comes to water? It's huge. So that's my first observation, is that to study water properly, you just have to be ready to take on law. The Clean Water Act, for example, these provisions of the Clean Water Act were unknown to me until I started preparing for this presentation. Did you know that under the Clean Water Act, native nations in the United States can act as sovereign states if they show the capacity to enforce the Clean Water Act, which means they would be independent of the state in which they are enmeshed. That is a radical proposition for an indigenous community, made possible by a water law. It's not true about their forest policy or anything. So that's my first thing. Water is about law in a big way. The other thing about water is, I don't know, it doesn't go away. I mean, this whole idea that there's water scarcity is so ridiculous to me, coming out of forestry and animal studies. Extinction happens. Water doesn't actually go away. You have the easiest problem to solve. Water's everywhere. It's an easy problem. Yeah, extinction. That one's forever, except I'm working with a geneticist now who's going to bring back extinct species, so don't worry about that. Water has that going for it. I think its transmutability its cyclability, its cyclicality, really different than trees. Really materially different. Now trees have their own qualities that make them interesting, right? But those are two things that really strike me. This Flint water problem, it's so solvable. It's such a solvable problem. That strikes me as two big things. And then, third, something about unknowability. So one of the interesting things about the Nuclear Waste Policy Act in the United States is that it created the field of groundwater studies. I mean, groundwater studies existed before, but it exploded because they needed to bury the waste. And as it turns out, we don't know very much about the unsaturated zone in the groundwater horizon. And that's where you have to put the nuclear waste, I guess, by law. Suddenly there's a whole world that we don't really know. So there's a lot of it's like it's unknown. Whereas trees, oh yeah, I think we know about trees. All right, are we done? Have you been here long enough?
Yes. I found your presentation very interesting. I just had a question about the first case study, the one on Flint.
Yeah.
You were saying that if there was this, if the water was toxic in Flint, it was mainly because of a financial crisis that at the end had its roots on race issues. And I found that explanation very straightforward, and it made me think to explanations that we found also, like in Mexico, for explaining why there is no water in poor neighborhoods. And it seems quite simple in the Mexican case that there is no water in poor neighborhoods because public powers don't want to invest in those neighborhoods, and that's the most common explanation. But what happens with the poor neighborhoods that have water? And that was some of the questions that some scientists in Mexico tried to answer. And they discovered, for example, that in some neighborhoods, the fact that there was no, there had not been any change of party during it was the same party during 20 years that was governing, made that there was more public policies continuity. There was more continuity in the public policy. And so the public services were better. But this conclusion was completely again I don't know, some kind of political commitments toward like saying, oh, it's inequality that's causing water problems. We had this problem, the case was very different because we have a party that has governed the country during 70 years, and we remark that when he has not lost the power at the local level, the water services is better. Why? Because there is no continuity. It's not because the party is a better water manager. This is because there is a better continuity in public policy. So what do we do and what political economists do when they found explanations that don't really, I don't know how to fit with some political engagement? Because, is there not a tendency also to emphasize some explanations that would fit more with our political commitments?
Yes. On the last question, yes. Confirmation bias is real. So if you enter a problem with an answer, you're going to find that answer. So don't do that. Right? That's right. But that's true of all theoretical commitments, not just somehow politically correct. So, I mean, I think that's why you want to be critically reflexive. I think that's part of a politically logical commitment to rigor, is to make sure you're plumbing all of these other hypotheses. You know, I think that's outstanding. When it comes to Flint, the question I would then ask, I think is a great question, is which cities are replacing pipes? Which cities already got rid of all the lead? I actually don't know. I'd like to see the list of the cities that have replaced their pipes and the ones who haven't. And I think you're going to find that it's going to be something more like your answer, something more like political science, right, than political ecology. Something to do with those jurisdictional histories, whether that's about party politics or whatever else. So the important thing is to have hypotheses and questions that are answerable, that you're theory doesn't take you off to just make up stories. And to be critically reflexive of the fact that your theory is probably leading you often in the wrong direction. So I think it's not a problem. I mean, it's a problem if you let it be a problem. So I am totally sympathetic. I think a lot of people go out. I've read a lot of NS National Science Foundation dissertation improvement proposals over the years. I sit on these boards that read these, and half of them, you already know the person has the answer. So I don't fund those, because it's not science. Did I say that on camera too? So I'm saying you're right. That's not a very good answer? You're not happy with my answer. Are we done?
Yes.
I want to talk about it.